In this video, you will learn how NestJS interceptors work. Interceptors intercept incoming requests before they reach your controller's route handler. They can perform additional logic before the route handler is called. Interceptors also intercept the outgoing response sent to the client, allowing you to perform additional logic on the return value before the whole response is sent back. Let's say, for example, we want the client to be able to make a request to the server and get a user back. The request reaches the server, the controller's route handler is called, and the route handler gets the user record from the user service. The user object returned may contain sensitive information we may want to filter out, such as a password field. You'll find yourself writing the logic to remove the password field somewhere in your controller or service layer. This can change the direct responsibility of the original function intended to do a specific operation. Instead, you can use an interceptor to abstract the additional logic away. The interceptor can take the user returned from the route handler, remove the password field, and send the user record to the client. Overall, interceptors can do anything you want before any request and response is received. Let's hop into our NestJS project and implement one. So right now I have a very basic project set up. I just generated a new Nest project. I didn't do anything except for creating some basic things so that we can get started very quickly. You can grab the code from GitHub. The link is in the description. But if you see right over here, I have a simple users module, and I have my user service added as a provider, and I have my users controller. If we look at our users controller, we have our API/users route set up for this users controller. And then I have a GET request that is going to handle GET requests to API/users, which is going to return an array of mock users. And we can see right over here, it's calling the user service that we injected into our users controller. And it goes ahead and calls GET users. So if we look at the user service class, right now this method GET users just returns mock users, which is just an array of these plain JavaScript objects, these user types. Okay, and I also have my user class up over here. So just a lot of basic things that I just wanted to get out of the way. So what we're going to do now is let's go ahead and just make sure everything works first. So I'm going to click send. You can see I'm getting back my list of users, and my server is running as well just fine, obviously. So what we're going to do is we're going to create our interceptor. And ideally what I want to do is I want to intercept requests coming into this GET request for API/users. Primarily though, since we're not really sending any data to our backend to this endpoint, and there's really nothing that we need to do when we are handling the request at the moment, I want to actually modify the response that is sent back to the client because I don't want the password to be visible to the client. That's actually very bad. Even if it's hashed, you don't want to send the actual password field back. So what I'm going to do is inside my users folder right here, I'm going to create a new folder called Interceptors. And all of the interceptors that we create will go inside this folder. So I'll create a new file and I'll call it users.interceptor.ts. So every interceptor in NestJS is going to be a class. So let's create a class and export it. I'll call this class users_interceptor. And we also want to make sure that we use the injectable decorator as well and mark this as a provider. Now our users interceptor needs to implement the nest interceptor interface. Okay, every interceptor must implement this interface. So the method that we must implement is this intercept method. Now this intercept method actually takes a couple of arguments. Only takes 2, so not too bad. The first argument is the context, which is of type execution context. And then the second argument is this next argument, and the type annotation for this is call handler, like that. Okay. Now with the context, you can use the context argument to call methods such as getClass. And this getClass method will give you back the actual controller class instance. So for example, if I were to make a GET request to API/users, well, this request pertains to this user's controller, and NestJS keeps track of that with the execution context. So in the interceptor, when we actually intercept that GET request, by calling getClass, it will return to me this user's controller class instance. Okay, so I'll just write a simple console log right over here, and I'll just reference the name Okay, so again, whatever you need from the context, maybe you want to get the handler, so that will get you the get users function because that's our request handler that's going to be called. That'll give you the reference to that. You can go ahead and grab it by calling get handler. Okay, now what's most important is actually this next argument. This next argument is an object that has this handle property, which is a method, and you can call this method. And what this does is it actually just calls the request handler for that pertaining request inside the controller. So again, if we make a get request to API/users, the request handler that's supposed to be called is this get users method inside our users controller class. So this users interceptor inside the intercept method, when I call next.handle, it actually is going to call this get users method. Again, NestJS keeps track of all that for us, so we can easily perform these types of abstractions. So by calling next.handle, it'll go ahead and call get users, and it'll perform its necessary business logic. In this case, it's going to reference this.user service and call get users, which will return to us our mock users array. And then we want to make sure that we return this next.handle call, and that will go ahead and return back to the client that made the request, and it'll give them the users array. Okay, so let's actually just test this out real quick and see what's going on. Additionally, let me also add some type annotations as well. So for the intercept method, we can type annotate this because the actual return value is an observable or promise observable like this. And observable is imported from RxJS. This package is installed by default when you scaffold your NestJS project. Okay, of course, I'm going to change this type of any later. I'm just going to leave it like that for now. I want to first show you what happens when I apply the users interceptor to my get users request handler. So I'm going to go ahead and right underneath my get decorator, I'm going to use the use interceptors decorator, and that's imported from nestjs/common. I'm going to go ahead and pass that users interceptor class like an argument into use interceptors, just like this. And we are importing users interceptor up top over here. So watch what's going to happen when I make a request to get API/users right over here. Let me quickly add a console log, and I'll just say inside get users handler. And so what you'll see is that when I make a get request to API/users, the first thing that will happen is it's going to intercept my request with the users interceptor. So this intercept method gets called, and we're going to log the class name. And then it's going to go ahead and call next.handle, and then it's going to call this get users method. So that's what next.handle does. It calls get users. It's going to console log this message over here. It's going to go ahead and call the user service get users method, return the value returned back from get users, and then it's going to return it back to the client. So I'm going to go into Thunder Client right now. I'm going to click send. Okay, and now let's look at the console. You can see right over here, it is currently logging users controller. So that is the class name that's logged inside our intercept method. So it is working expectedly. And right after it logs the controller name or the class name, you can see that it logs whatever I just wrote inside the request handler function, which says inside get users handler. So you can see the order of the logs that are happening. So that verifies that the interceptor is intercepting the request and then calling the request handler. Okay, so right now we're not doing anything but just writing some logs. Let's go ahead and actually do something with the response, because that's what we can do with interceptors. We can not only intercept the request, but also intercept the response. So right over here, this next.handle method call, it returns an observable, okay? And the observable has this pipe method that I can call, and I can use this pipe method to apply RxJS operators. So for example, if I wanted to access the data that's in the observable, I can do that. If I wanted to apply a transformation of the data, I can do that as well. So we can use this map operator. I'm going to import this from RxJS. And then what I can do with this map operator is I can pass a callback function, which gets me the data itself as an argument into that callback function. And from here, I know that data is actually going to be an array of users. So I can actually just reference data and I can call any array method I want. So I can call .map or .filter. I'll just return data the way it is right now. And then if I click send, you can see right now it's going to send me back the users unmodified. We didn't do anything with it just yet. If I want to, I can add a field. I can just do data and just return data like this. Or let me just remove this part because we already doing that. This is the shorthand syntax. If I click send, you can see now it's going to actually return an object with this property data, and that maps to the array of users. Okay, so you can see how I am transforming the return value. So let's actually go ahead and do this first. Let me actually type annotate call handler. So this tells me what the return type of get users is going to be. So we know that get users returns an array of users. So first let me import this user class that is from user.ts. I created this ahead of time. So this is going to be an array of user. So now you'll notice that data actually has a type annotation now. Before it was any, but now after adding the type annotation on call handler, data is now properly type annotated to be an array of users. Let me also just do the same thing for the observable right over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just remove this part over here. And what I'll do very quickly is I'll remove the password field from the user object itself. So we can do that very easily like this. So I'm going to reference data.map. I'm going to call the map method. And I'm going to pass a callback function. And in that callback function, we have an argument, which is the user itself. I'm going to actually destructure the password from user, and I'm going to pack all of the remaining fields into this user object right over here. So I'm basically extracting password, and I'm keeping all of the remaining fields inside the user object itself. You can see when I hover over it, we now only have ID, username, and display name. And then I'm just going to return the user itself like this. Okay, right now it's going to complain because obviously we are returning an object or an array of objects that does not contain that password field. But let me just actually do this very quickly. Let me just set this to any very quickly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just make a request now, just because I want to show you this example. And you can see now when I click send, it returns the list of users without the password. Okay, now while this does work, it's not the way to do it in NestJS, so I'll show you how to do it the NestJS way. So what I'm going to do is install two packages. I'm going to install class transformer, and I'm going to install reflect metadata. So class transformer gives me decorators that I can apply on my class fields, and reflect metadata is needed to actually use class transformer. So let me run my server again, and it's actually very easy to use. So what we'll do is we'll go inside the user class that I created, and we want to remove this password field from being shown to the client. Now, instead of just entirely removing this password field, because we can't do that because we actually need the password field itself to represent our user, because obviously we're saving the password to our database or some data source. We just want to temporarily, or just, kind of like not expose this field to the client itself. So with class transformer, I can use this exclude decorator. So that comes from class transformer right over here. And what I can do is I can transform my user instances. And whenever we do that, it's going to exclude the password field. So when we transform those user instances, there's this function that we can import from class transformer called plain to instance. And I can actually call plain to instance like this. And then what I can do is I can pass in the class that I want to transform the object to, and then the object itself. Obviously, we don't have the object right now, but this is just an example of what the syntax looks like. So when we do that, it's actually going to create the new object, but exclude the password. So what we'll do is we'll leave this alone right now. Let's just go into main.ts. We need to import reflect metadata in order for this to work. So import it like this inside your main.ts file. And then we're going to go into our interceptor class. And instead of doing all this, I'm going to go ahead and instead of destructuring these properties, I'm going to get the user object, and I'm going to go ahead and call this plain to instance function. Plain to instance, like that. And so what this will do is it'll convert the literal object. So in our case, these mock objects, because these are actually not instances of users. These are just plain JSON objects. Okay, they're not actually instances of our user class. So essentially what we're doing is we're going to convert those plain objects to an actual user instance. And then since we have this exclude field right over here, or this exclude decorator on the password field, it will exclude that password field. So first we need to pass the user class as an argument like this. Notice the capital U right over here. And then we're going to go ahead and pass the actual object that we want to convert into the instance. So in this case, it's our user argument over here. Okay, so we're basically converting user into the user class. So hopefully this makes sense. Now watch what's going to happen when I go and make a request. If I click send, you're going to see now I no longer see the password field over here. If I remove this exclude decorator and make the request again, you're going to see that now I actually see the password in the user object itself. So this is how you would do it the quote-unquote NestJS way, by using class transformer instead of just doing what I just did earlier by destructuring the password field and then sending just the remaining object with the remaining fields. So hopefully this makes sense. Now, aside from just modifying the response and sending it back to the client, interceptors can also be used to catch errors. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to go ahead into my user's controller class, and I'll create another method, and I'll just call this create user like this. I'm going to use the post decorator. Notice that it's imported from NestJS common. And we're not actually going to create a user. I'm just going to make a post request to this endpoint. And I'm just going to throw an error or an exception. So throw new HTTP exception. So that's also imported from nestjs/common up top over here. And for the first argument, I'm going to pass in the message. I'll just say bad request and then status code of 400. So I'm just going to throw an error, and I want to show you how we can catch it inside an interceptor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a new interceptor, because you can create as many as you want and apply as many as you want to a certain request handler. So what I'll do is I'll create a new file. I'll call this errors.interceptor.ts, and I'm going to create a class, call it user error interceptor, implements the nest interceptor interface, and I'll just use autocomplete to complete the method implementation like this. And let me just use the injectable decorator to mark this interceptor as an injectable. And now let's go ahead and do this. So I'm going to take my user error interceptor, and I want to apply it to this create user request handler. So I'm going to use the use interceptors decorator like we did for our get users method, and I'm going to apply the user error interceptor. So I'm going to import it up top over here, and I'm applying that interceptor to this create user request method handler. Okay, now what I'm going to do is whenever we actually call this method, it's going to throw this HTTP exception. So we need to make sure we obviously call that request handler, and we do that by calling next.handle. If we don't call this method, it's not going to actually call that request handler. And remember that handle returns an observable, so I can call this pipe method, and then I can use this catch error RxJS operator. So let's import that from RxJS up top over here. And this is also a function as well. And then you can use catch error to literally catch the error. So what I can do is I can pass this callback function like this, and then I can throw an error myself. And this is also another operator as well. And then what I can do is I can just pass in this other callback function inside throw error. And from here on, I can literally do whatever I want. I can throw a new error of a different type. So for example, so right over here, you can see I'm throwing an HTTP exception. But if I wanted to throw a different type of exception, so let's do HTTP exception. Let's just do intercepted response. And let's send a status code of, let's do 500 just as an example. Okay. I know it is going to look redundant, but the whole purpose is to show you how the interceptor intercepts the error that is going to be thrown inside the request handler function. So let's go ahead and do this. Okay. Let's go back to here. Let's make a post request. We already applied the errors interceptor to our endpoint, so that's good. So if I click send, notice how now, instead of our request handler sending back this status code of 400 and sending back bad request, notice how now it actually says status code 500, intercept the response. If I actually remove this pipe right over here, this pipe call, and if I make the request again, you can see now, instead of actually intercepting the response or modifying the response, because it's still intercepting a response, we're just not doing anything with it. It's just going to go ahead and call create user, and it's going to let create user throw this error, and we're not doing anything at all with the error. We're just going to let it return back to the client, and then the client will see this as the response. So I hope that this shows you that you can actually catch errors inside the interceptor layer. So let's say, for example, your create user method is going to perform some side effect, such as calling the database, or maybe it's going to call an external API using an HTTP client. And you don't want to perhaps do a try catch like this to handle your errors. Instead, what you could do is you can actually just call the method, and then you can let the interceptor catch the error if there are any errors at all. Okay, so let's just say if there weren't any errors. Let's just go ahead and remove this entire call over here. Okay, we're not going to throw any errors at all, but we're going to catch them if there are any. If I were to click send right now, notice how nothing happens. It just sends back a 201. Okay, we just assume that it's a valid request and a valid response. And you can see that this catch error only works if there's an actual error to be caught. So instead of just having our controller layer or service layer handle all of our errors, we can literally abstract that away into the interceptor layer. So hopefully this helps you better understand how powerful NestJS as a framework is, if in case you haven't already figured that out, because we have so many different abstracted layers that can handle certain things for us, and it makes it easy for us to write code that doesn't have to do too much and do too little. So now my controller layer can just be responsible for just calling the service layer. It doesn't have to worry about handling any errors at all. We can pass that responsibility to our interceptor. So I hope that this tutorial made sense to you all. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any other questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. I also have a Discord server that you can join. The link is also in the description. Check it out. You can go ahead and ask any questions that you want regarding programming. So I hope those resources help out. So that's going to be pretty much it for this tutorial. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will see you all in my next episode. Peace out.